I was born to a noble name, but my voice was stolen from me before I ever learned how to use it. Yet he, the most feared of alphas, noticed me. Me. A servant girl hidden among cauldrons and silence. I learned to exist without being seen, bound to a fate I no longer dare to call my own. I carry on my hands the scent of ashes, remnants of a noble past no one remembers. The king was meant to choose a flawless queen, eloquent, radiant, powerful. But when his gaze swept across the hall, it overlooked crowns and titles and stopped on me. His eyes cut through the shadows where I hid. It was as if the white wolf had scented my very soul, my truth, my secret, my fear. Why would he choose someone who cannot even cry out for help? Why would the most ruthless predator in the kingdom claim someone who lost her own voice? I still do not know the answer, but I can feel that my silence is exactly what he came to claim. The polished floor of the royal solarium felt like thin ice beneath my coarse, kitchen-worn boots. One moment, I, Emma Sunstone, 22 years old, was scrubbing pots, surrounded by the comforting, pungent stench of tallow and burnt sugar. The next, I was standing here, illuminated by crystal chandeliers that cast too bright, unforgiving light on my threadbare dress, 1,000 hostile eyes boring into my back. The choosing ceremony had been a blur of gilded silence and panicked motion. When the king's voice, a rumble that echoed through the stone of the ancient hall, had pronounced my name, the sound had hit me harder than a physical blow. Not Lily Hayes, the fabricated identity of the mute scullery maid, but a name he shouldn't have known, Emma. The silence that followed Theron Blackwood's decree was deafening. It was the sound of 1,000 shattered political alliances and the collective fury of the most powerful she-wolves in the kingdom. Duchesses, Alpha's daughters, and strategically groomed nobility, who had spent years preparing for this moment, suddenly realized they had been usurped by a girl who smelled faintly of boiled cabbage. I was led away, not dragged, but moved with a surprising, almost reverent care by 2 enormous guards who smelled of musk and mountain frost. They took me out of the suffocating ballroom and up, through wings of the castle I had only ever cleaned in my darkest nightmares. The servants' quarters were defined by shadow and grit. The king's wing was defined by cold, perfect luminosity, where every surface reflected the immense wealth and power of the Ashworth line. My entire life since the purge of my family, that dark day when I lost my voice and gained the burden of my silence, had been dedicated to blending into the background, becoming a non-entity. Now, I was the most watched person in the kingdom, a political flashpoint wearing stolen servant clothes. We stopped before a set of massive ebony doors carved with the snarling profile of the white wolf, the emblem of the Alpha King. The guards retreated, and the doors opened silently, revealing not a lavish throne room, but a private study, austere and vast. The air was heavy with the scent of old parchment and raw power. Standing before the immense hearth, the white wolf himself turned. This was Theron Blackwood, 30 years old, Alpha King of the largest pack in the Northern Territories. He wasn't merely handsome. He was a force of nature dressed in tailored black velvet, his presence physically demanding attention. His hair was the color of fresh snow, stark against his dark skin, and his eyes, the piercing, unnatural silver unique to the white wolves, were fixed entirely on me. They weren't just the eyes of a ruler. They held a predatory intelligence, the kind that saw secrets others worked hard to hide. He hadn't moved from the hearth, yet I felt pinned to the floor. "Luna, Emma," he said, his voice deep and measured, completely devoid of the expected celebratory tone. "Welcome to your new life." I could only look at the marble floor, my hands twisting the thin fabric of my skirt. Every nerve ending screamed for me to run back to the familiar, safe anonymity of the kitchens. But the invisible leash of his power, the inescapable pull of the mate bond, held me fast. "Don't worry about the noise down below," he continued, gesturing vaguely towards the floor, indicating the uproar of the court. The shrieking will stop when they realize their complaints are futile. He finally took a step closer. One step. It felt like 10 meters of earth had collapsed between us. "You are wondering why," he stated, not asking. Why the mute servant, the girl nobody saw, when every eligible, educated, and vocal woman in the realm was practically throwing herself at my feet? I swallowed hard, the movement painful. If I could have spoken, I would have begged him to tell me. Was this a cruel joke? A strategic humiliation of his rivals? Or did he truly sense the fate bond, that overwhelming electric connection that had flared between us the moment his gaze had grazed mine across the ballroom? Theron walked slowly to a desk made of dark, heavy wood. He picked up a single polished river stone, small and smooth, the color of twilight. They expected eloquence, political savvy, and powerful lineage, he mused, turning the stone over in his fingers. They expected a voice that could command attention and charm nations. He dropped the stone back onto the wood with a quiet thud. "But I do not need another voice, Emma. I have my own. What I need is someone who understands the weight of silence." My heart hammered against my ribs. A trapped bird, desperate for freedom, understands the weight of silence. Did he know? Did he realize that my silence wasn't simply a tragic flaw, but a deliberate shield, a necessary consequence of having a lineage that powerful people had paid highly to erase? He stepped closer again, stopping just inches away. I could smell the clean, sharp scent of his wolf, ozone, and winter air. It was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. My hidden wolf, the one I had suppressed so thoroughly she felt like a ghost, strained forward, wanting to rub against his power, to finally submit to the true alpha. He didn't try to touch me, which was perhaps worse than physical contact. His gaze alone was sufficient to strip away layers of my carefully constructed anonymity. "Your file, the one prepared by the head cook," said Lily Hayes. "Mute, no family records, works efficiently, never causes trouble." He scoffed, a soft, dry sound. A convenient phantom. He lifted a hand, and for the first time I flinched, expecting judgment or anger, but his hand merely reached past me, resting on the wall behind my head. He leaned in, his silver eyes blazing, locking my gaze. "Tell me, Emma Sunstone," he murmured, his voice now dangerously low, a deep vibration that resonated in my chest and vibrated against my stolen voice box. "When was the last time someone dared to look you in the eye and call you by the name you were born with?" The blood drained from my face. My breath caught in my throat, a painful, useless gasp. He hadn't just chosen me randomly. He knew my secret. The name Sunstone was the marker of my family, the noble line that had been systematically dismantled by a rival court decades ago, the very reason I lived as Lily in the soot-stained kitchens, hoping never to be noticed. My mind raced. How could he possibly know? Who told him? Was this whole choosing a trap, a way to lure out the ghost of a forgotten noble family? Fear, sharp and paralyzing, caused tears to sting the back of my eyes. I shook my head minutely, trying to communicate my terror, my denial. "No, I am Lily. I am nothing." Theron's face remained unreadable, but his silver eyes darkened with an intensity that bordered on fury. He didn't ask for a verbal answer. He demanded a truth beyond words. He moved his hand from the wall, his strong fingers brushing my chin, forcing my head up. He used the silent connection of the mate bond, flooding my senses with a sudden, overwhelming wave of his alpha power. A non-verbal command, to be honest. Tell me the history they erased. His essence seemed to boom inside my skull. Show me the face of the woman they forced into silence. Under the crushing weight of his demand, my carefully maintained composure fractured. A tremor ran through me. I couldn't speak, but I could cry. A single hot tear escaped my eye, tracing a path down my cheek, a silent acknowledgement of the name he had resurrected and the danger it represented. Theron watched the tear fall, his expression softening slightly, a flicker of something almost protective replacing the steel. He wiped the tear away with his thumb, the roughness of his skin startling against mine. "Good," he whispered, low enough that if I had been capable of speech, I would have had to lean in to hear it. "That is the answer I needed. Your silence is not a void, Luna. It is a lockbox, and I intend to find the key to everything that was stolen from you." He stepped back, reclaiming his personal space, but the atmosphere remained charged. "The others," he continued, gesturing towards the invisible court below. They see a flaw, a disability. They see a queen who cannot rally the troops or negotiate treaties. They assume I made a romantic, foolish mistake. He straightened his back, radiating the absolute authority of his position. They do not understand that the one who has nothing left to lose, who has mastered the art of observation because she could not rely on words, is the most dangerous weapon of all. I did not choose you despite your silence, Emma. I chose you because of it. It means you were paying attention when everyone else was talking. He walked back to his desk and lifted a roll of crisp official parchment tied with a scarlet ribbon, the formal declaration of their union. He did not hand it to me. He simply held it, a symbol of the obligation that now bound us. The enemies of my pack are legion. They whisper, they scheme, and they trust their own voices too much. You, Emma Sunstone, are the antidote to their noise. From this moment on, your survival depends not on finding your voice, but on understanding that your silence is no longer a burden of fear, but a tool of immense power. It links us, completely and irrevocably. And I assure you, my silent Luna, I am aware of the darkness waiting for anyone who dares to claim a sunstone. He set the parchment down, a final, definitive gesture. The world shifted. I was no longer the scullery maid. I was the white wolf's mate, bound by a dangerous knowledge and a mutual, silent understanding of the treacherous history someone had tried to bury. My journey was not about romance, I realized with a sudden, chilling certainty, but about survival, resurrection, and the silent war that had just begun. He had not only chosen me, he had drafted me into a battle I was born to fight. The quiet truth of his gaze affirmed it. He knew exactly who I was, and he intended to use me. The parchment sat heavily on the dark mahogany, a physical testament to the utter impossibility of my situation. It wasn't just a marriage certificate. It was a warrant for danger, signed in the blood of a resurrected legacy. I stared at the spot where Theron's thumb had wiped away my tear. The residual warmth seemed to linger on my skin, a brand of his ownership and his dangerous knowledge. He was right. My silence was not a flaw. It was a cage I had constructed around the fragments of who I truly was. And he, the most powerful man in the kingdom, had just picked the lock. The history they buried, Theron said, his voice dropping from its formal command tone to something more intimate, more chilling. He moved away from the desk, walking to the large windows overlooking the sprawling, snow-dusted grounds. They didn't just erase the Sunstone name from the land rolls, Emma. They tried to erase the memory of a royal line built on unparalleled foresight and unmatched neutrality, a neutrality that threatened the ambitions of those who preferred chaos. My eyes followed him. Neutrality. My family's motto had been whispered to me once by my grandmother, a forgotten memory of a time before the terror, to speak only when the sword is silent. He turned back, catching my gaze through the reflection in the glass. You see, my court is composed of talkers. They believe power lies in articulation, in alliances cemented by treaties and oaths shouted from the ramparts. But the true threat doesn't come in a declarative speech. It comes in the quiet calculation made behind a closed door. The kind of calculation you have mastered over the last decade in the anonymity of the kitchens. He was speaking of the Duke of Vane, the neighboring pack leader who had been overtly aggressive about securing the Luna position for his daughter, or perhaps the influential Baroness Sedaris, who controlled the kingdom's trade routes and saw me as a mute impediment to her influence. They were the noisy ones, the ones whose fury was currently echoing somewhere far beneath us. When I looked at those women, Theron continued, a flicker of cold amusement in his silver eyes, I saw weakness. I saw women who would divulge state secrets over a glass of wine, who would betray alliances simply to hear the sound of their own influence. He paused, letting the crushing weight of his assessment settle. When I looked at you, he finished, stepping toward me again, I saw a woman who has survived the systematic attempt to destroy her. I saw someone who remembers the cost of words. The bond between us, that overwhelming electric current, intensified. It wasn't just attraction. It was a profound recognition, soul calling to soul across a chasm of mutual understanding regarding political danger. I needed to ask him the crucial question, the one that burned in my mind. Even if I couldn't utter the sounds, who was responsible? I lifted my hands, pressing my fingers to my lips, then pointed a trembling finger toward the floor, attempting to gesture toward the history he referenced. My face must have been a mess of unspoken questions and desperate fear. Theron understood instantly. His powerful gaze never wavered. "The architect of your family's ruin is still at play, Emma," he said, his voice now lower, confidential, as if the castle walls might be listening. "They believe the Sunstone line is extinct. They believe they finished the job. If I had chosen any other Luna, the game would have continued as usual. Loud maneuvering, public threats, predictable betrayals." He walked behind the immense desk, resting his knuckles on the cold wood, radiating authority. "But now," he stated, a dangerous triumph coloring his tone, "I have done the one thing they never expected. I have chosen the ghost. I have signaled to them that the past is not buried. It is waiting, armed with my crown." My stomach clenched. I was not just Luna. I was bait. I was the silent, political detonator designed to draw out an enemy who thought they were safe in the shadows. Theron saw the realization hit me. He saw the cold fear return, the instinct to retreat back into the soot-stained corners of the kitchen where I had been safest. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk, his eyes searching mine with ruthless honesty. "You need to understand something, Emma. They expected me to select a partner who would argue with me, who would offer counsel, who would make noise. They expected a vocal impediment to my absolute rule. They expected a queen." His lip curled slightly. "What they have received is an observer. They will dismiss you. They will gossip about your disability. They will use your muteness as proof of my irrationality. Let them. Let them believe you are irrelevant." He tapped a spot on the desk with a single, sharp rhythm. "You will stand beside me, and you will say nothing. You will listen to every whisper, watch every shifting glance, and catalog every insult. Your quiet presence will be a mirror, reflecting their hidden intentions, because they will forget you are there. They will speak freely around the mute servant who became queen, and then you will communicate every detail to me, through the bond, or in writing." The challenge was terrifying, yet exhilarating. For the first time since I lost my family, I felt like my terrible silence had a purpose, a profound utility beyond mere survival. It was a tool of espionage, but the mate bond. It was still new, unfamiliar, and frighteningly intrusive. I slowly lifted my hand again, tracing the air between us, indicating the overwhelming pressure of his alpha presence that had forced the tear from my eye earlier. I wanted to communicate. Will I be safe? How can I protect myself from your power, or the power of this bond, if it can force my tears? Theron followed the gesture, his expression darkening with sudden, fierce understanding. He moved around the desk and stood close again, not looming, but presenting himself as a fortified shelter. "The bond," he murmured, his voice softening, a rare display of vulnerability that surprised me. "It is the only thing that could make me choose you over the political expedience of a duchess. It is the language we share, the one they cannot hear, and the one they cannot corrupt." He reached out, his hand hovering near my shoulder, respectful of my space. "My power is immense, Emma. It could shatter you, but my choice was not made in violence. The compulsion you felt was to force honesty, not obedience. And that," he stated, "is something we must learn to manage. I will not break you to rule you. I will fortify you to rule beside me." He placed his hand gently on my shoulder, and the immediate effect was explosive. Instead of the crushing alpha demand, a deliberate, focused current of pure reassurance flooded through the mate bond, directly into my consciousness. It was not a roar of power, but a silent declaration, a torrent of unspoken promises washing away my fear. "You are mine. Your silence is protected by my entire kingdom. The man who tried to bury you will face the White Wolf's wrath." The sheer force of his protective will was overwhelming. It bypassed my ears, my brain, and settled deep in the core of my suppressed wolf. My silent wolf, which had been cowering and small for a decade, suddenly stretched, feeling the immense, comforting weight of her alpha's acceptance. I closed my eyes, a silent, internal sob racking my chest, not of fear this time, but of relief and terrifying, utter acceptance. The weight of Lily Hayes, the ghost, lifted from my shoulders, replaced by the heavy, magnificent mantle of Emma Sunstone, the chosen queen. When I opened my eyes, Theron was watching me intently, his silver gaze burning with triumph. He knew I had received the message. "You are not just the antidote to their noise, silent Luna," he stated, his lips barely moving. "You are the key to my past failures. I have protected this kingdom with brute force and military strategy, But I failed to see the quiet treachery weaving through the court. You will see what I have missed." He removed his hand, the connection lessening but remaining a steady, deep hum. "We begin immediately. Tomorrow, the court will formally address their concerns about the choice of a mute queen. You will attend, dressed as befits your station, but you will hold your tongue. Every insult, every judgmental look, every misplaced pity, you collect it, you catalog it, and later, you will share it all with me." He walked back to the desk, picking up the official parchment. He looked at it, then at me. "The political cost of choosing you is astronomical, but the silence you bring to my side, the historical truth you represent, is invaluable. They thought they could silence a royal bloodline forever. They were wrong. They merely sharpened our weapon." He placed the parchment in a heavy, ornamental box lined with deep purple velvet, and secured it with a key he pocketed. "Rest now, Emma. The battle has begun, not with a clash of swords, but with the quiet observation of a woman they foolishly dismissed. You were never meant to speak. You were meant to listen, to survive, and ultimately, to watch the very people who tried to destroy your lineage dismantle themselves around you." I finally felt the truth settle deep within my bones. My life was no longer my own. It belonged to this silent war. My identity was no longer a burden of fear, but a blade honed by suffering. Theron had chosen me because I was invisible, forgotten, and silent. The perfect spy, the perfect observer, and the only woman capable of seeing the truth hidden beneath the court's loud ambition. I was the Luna who never spoke a word, and together, we would make sure the kingdom finally heard the resounding truth of the Sunstone resurrection. My survival was his victory, my silence, our strategy. The era of the White Wolf and his silent Luna had begun. The official announcement was set for the following afternoon, but the preparations began immediately, shattering the decade-long rhythm of my hidden existence. They whisked me from the modest servants' room to the expansive East Wing suite, a place dominated by windows that offered views not of the damp courtyard, but of the manicured, frosted gardens. It was a world of suffocating luxury. Servants, real, respectful servants, terrified of the king's choice, moved around me like cautious ghosts, dressing me in layers of heavy, shimmering silk, dyed the deep sapphire blue of the royal house. They pinned my plain, dark hair into an elaborate style meant for a queen, not a scullery maid. As the mirror reflected the transformation, I barely recognized the woman staring back. The shadows beneath my eyes were still there, remnants of lily haze, but the clothes demanded attention, forcing the world to acknowledge Emma Sunstone. The silence I was accustomed to was suddenly agonizing. It wasn't the comforting anonymity of the kitchen. It was an imposing, deafening void in this gilded cage. How was I supposed to command respect when I couldn't even thank the maid for tightening the corset? The mate bond, however, provided a terrifying, immediate answer. Just as I felt the crushing panic rise, the urge to claw off the silk and run back to the scent of burnt flour and safety, a warmth unlike anything I had ever known pulsed through my chest. It wasn't just comfort. It was an insistent mental directive, clear and clean. Breathe. Stand tall. They are not worth your fear. I realized then, with a jolt, that Theron wasn't relying solely on notes or subtle gestures. He intended to communicate his strategies, his reassurance, and his authority directly into my mind. The bond was our private, encrypted network, operational even when separated by thick castle walls. When Theron finally entered the chamber, dressed in his formal regalia, silver armor over crisp white linen, the very image of the White Wolf, he paused at the doorway, his gaze sweeping over my transformed appearance. There was no lust or simple admiration in his silver eyes. There was satisfaction. He looked at me as a master strategist looks at a newly polished, devastatingly effective weapon. "Magnificent," he stated, his voice a low rumble. He crossed the room, dismissing the remaining servants with a glance. "The color suits you. It reflects the truth they try to deny. You are royalty, Emma, not a kitchen ghost." He reached out and gently adjusted a silver pendant resting on my collarbone, a single, heavy sunstone, the symbol of my forgotten house. "This is not a costume," he continued, leaning close so only I could hear. "This is a uniform for war. Every noble in this castle will try to pry a secret from you, to force a reaction, to use your condition as leverage. They will try to shame me into recanting my choice, but you will give them nothing." I nodded once, sharp and decisive, already falling into the rhythm of responding without sound. "Good," he murmured, his thumb brushing lightly across the nape of my neck, right where the bond felt strongest. "Remember your family's motto, to speak only when the sword is silent. Our sword is not silent yet, therefore neither should you be." The walk to the grand audience hall was agonizing. The entire court, hundreds of the kingdom's most influential, ruthless, and ambitious wolves, were assembled. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes, polished leather, and suppressed aggression. Theron held my arm in a grip that was both possessive and stabilizing. His immense height and commanding presence demanded absolute deference, yet I could feel the hostile energy pressing against his shield. As we ascended the dais, the whispers began, a sound like dry leaves skittering across marble. "Shez the mute servant. The king has lost his mind. A sunstone. Impossible. They are extinct. Look at her. She's terrified. A weakness." I kept my eyes fixed forward, cataloging the faces. The Duke of Vane, a massive older wolf whose face was set in a sneer of barely controlled fury, stood front and center. Beside him, the Baroness Sedaris, sleek and sharp, observed me with surgical detachment, her head cocked as if listening to a distant, unpleasant frequency. They were the architects of the noise, the ones who had expected their political machinations to secure the throne. Theron seated me first on the smaller, secondary throne, the Luna's seat, before taking his place. The silence that fell after he was seated was absolute, heavy, and expectant. He allowed the tension to stretch for a deliberate moment before he spoke, his voice booming across the hall, yet perfectly controlled. "Members of the court, we have assembled today for the formal introduction of your new Luna, my mate, Emma." He didn't need to speak my lineage. The sapphire colors and the sunstone pendant were enough to send fresh waves of shock through the room. The Duke of Vane didn't wait. He stepped forward, bypassing the usual protocol, his voice laced with false concern. "Your Majesty," the Duke began, his eyes fixed pointedly on me. "We all understand the power of the bond, but the kingdom's stability requires more than mere spiritual alignment. The Luna must be the king's voice when he is away, a diplomatic face to foreign powers, a counselor in times of crisis. With all due respect," he stressed the words, dripping with disrespect, "how can a woman who has endured such unfortunate suffering fulfill these demands? How can she advise you when she cannot utter a single word?" The challenge was direct, brutal, and strategically public. The murmuring intensified, and dozens of heads nodded in agreement with the Duke's pragmatic cruelty. They weren't questioning my worth. They were questioning Theron's fitness to rule. I felt a sudden, familiar tightness in my throat, the decade-old muscular lock of fear trying to seize me. The sheer audacity of the public shame threatened to overwhelm me. My hands gripped the carved arms of the throne, my knuckles white. I need to run. I need to hide. But before the panic could fully bloom, the mate bond exploded. It wasn't a demanding roar, but a wall of protective clarity. Theron didn't move, yet his mind reached out and violently silenced the fear in mine. The sheer force of his mental presence was the climax of silence. It was more articulate than any shout, more authoritative than any decree. It bypassed my vocal cords, bypassed my fear, and slammed the realization into my core. I was protected, fortified, and utterly unified with the Alpha King. I inhaled sharply, maintaining the outward composure of the silent queen. I turned my head slowly, deliberately, fixing my gaze on the Duke of Vane. I didn't scowl. I didn't shrink. I simply watched him. I allowed my eyes to bore into his, cataloging the rage, the naked ambition, and the sheer audacity of his public challenge. The Duke stumbled slightly under my silent scrutiny, expecting the wide, frightened eyes of a victim. Instead, he met the steady, cold gaze of a witness. He looked away first. Theron, seeing the shift in my internal state, offered a slight, almost imperceptible smile. He then rose, standing so tall that he cast a shadow over the entire assembly. "The Duke poses a fair question," Theron said, his voice dangerously soft. "He asks how my Luna will advise me, how she will serve the kingdom when she cannot speak. And my answer is simple." He looked directly at the Duke. "The Sunstone line has always been known for its unparalleled honesty. Their word was truth itself. And when a word is true, Theron stated, emphasizing the final word, it must be used sparingly. My past failures stemmed from listening to too many eloquent, silver-tongued liars. He glanced around the hall, ensuring his words pierced every corner. What they have done to my mate is a crime of history, driven by ambition and fear of her family's impartiality. But their attempt to silence her has only intensified her value. He settled his hand on my shoulder, possessive and final. You asked how she can advise me? She advises me by observing your lies, by tracking your shifting alliances, by collecting the data that your incessant noise obscures. The Luna does not need to speak, Duke. She only needs to see. The atmosphere curdled. Theron had not only defended me, he had publicly declared that every person in the room was a potential traitor, and that my silence was their espionage weakness. The Baroness Sidaris tried to salvage the situation, offering a sugary, patronizing smile. We wish the Luna well in her recovery, Your Majesty. We pray that one day she finds her voice. I didn't move. I simply recorded the pity in her eyes, the condescension in her tone. Recovery? I had nothing to recover from. My silence was a shield, and now it was a weapon. Theron delivered the final blow to the opposition. The Luna is perfectly well, Baroness. She speaks every day, but only to me. And when she speaks the truth. He stood then, pulling me gently to my feet, signaling the end of the audience. The message was unmistakable. The matter was closed. The king had chosen his mate, and anyone who challenged her silence was challenging his throne. As Theron guided me from the hall, the whispers were gone, replaced by a horrified, grudging silence. They feared me now, not because I was the king's choice, but because I was the king's unseen weapon. Back in the privacy of the East Wing, the heavy silk felt less like a costume and more like a second skin. I found the nearest parchment and quill. I had listened. I had watched. And now, I had information. My fingers, used to the repetitive motion of kneading dough, moved with surprising speed, transcribing the Duke's sneer, the Baroness's false piety, and the shock on the faces of 3 minor nobles who flinched when Theron mentioned the Sunstone lineage. I pushed the lengthy document across the desk toward Theron, who was already peeling off his heavy armor. He took the notes and read them slowly, a look of profound satisfaction deepening the lines around his eyes. He didn't need to ask me about the emotional toll of the public humiliation. He had been there, in my mind, the entire time. When he finished reading, he looked up at me, a deep respect shining in his gaze. You saw everything, Emma. You were utterly invisible, yet utterly present. He tossed the parchment onto a dying fire in the hearth. The battle for your acceptance will be long and messy, but the initial skirmish is ours. They now believe your muteness is a genuine infirmity, not a strategic choice. They will forget you are a listener. They will become sloppy. He crossed the room, pulling me into a firm embrace. This time the bond wasn't a weapon or a shield. It was a sanctuary. The scent of him, cedar, snow, and pure alpha power, filled my senses. My hands wrapped around his waist, grounding me in this new, terrifying reality. I finally understood the full scope of his decision. He hadn't chosen me despite my silence. He had chosen me because of it. My stolen voice was the perfect cloak, the ultimate defense against the noise of a deceitful court, and the key to resurrecting a truth someone had tried to bury with my family. The ghost had been summoned from the kitchen, dressed in sapphire, and placed upon the throne. I was the silent, listening queen, and my reign finally had begun in earnest. Level up your feed, subscribe, and give this video a big thumbs up.